Hey everybody, welcome to The Ordinary Professor. My name is Dr. Courtney Pegram, and I am all things social skills and emotional intelligence. So I started developing these mini trainings to help professionals understand how to do the thing so they can be more effective at work. So join me as I talk about effective group facilitation. So this mini training will provide you an overview of the key principles and strategies to effectively facilitate meeting or collaborative sessions. So think Facilitation 101. So often my clients ask me, either in coaching or when I'm running groups, like, how do I become a facilitator? And it's an art. So this is like the foundation of understanding what it takes to be a facilitator. So a facilitator is someone that facilitates the content, facilitates the learning, right? Where a lecturer or let's just say a leader running a meeting can be totally different. So the idea is we want to build our facilitation skills. Now a lecturer, somebody's going to lecture, right? And there'll be a little less interaction. So you want to think about facilitation as an art of delivering content so people are engaged and understand and participate in the learning. So let's define our purpose and goals. So we really want to work today on the foundations of facilitation. Now, when you are setting up your own facilitation, it's really important to figure out your goals. So let's share by train the trainer model. So today, when you're in the session, you understand the do's and don'ts of facilitation. You understand how to set up your agenda. You understand how to set up your goals. And you're going to learn how some things that we currently do might not be effective and ways to do things better, right? So the first thing when it comes to facilitation is define the purpose and goals of the training. So you want to clearly outline the purpose of the group. So why are they meeting, right? Reason. Explain if that you want to achieve something specific. Is it a training meeting, a review? Is it what do we want to accomplish? So having an agenda prior and inviting the right people to the table is critical. Communicate the expectations of the group. So you can I do like a whiteboard and say, let's throw up some expectations, some group norms, right? Some ground rules, whatever you want to call it. I don't like ground rules, it's my language. It's not my preferred facilitation language, but whatever floats your boat, just write it up there. The goal is to set expectations so that people know how to interact, communicate, and manage each other and manage themselves in this group setting, right? So typically having 3 to 5 expectations or social group norms are really important. You can develop, if this group is meeting often, a social contract, right? So I do that a lot in my teaching, where we have a social contract to create inclusion, also the ability to have students share their voices. So in your group, you could have a social contract, which establishes the rules of how we operate. We'll talk about the things that we expect from each other, from me, from others, right? So that people are clear on the deliverables. They're clear on what to do, how to show up, what is appropriate and inappropriate behavior. You'd be surprised, but oftentimes when people make mistakes, they just didn't know, right? And the reason I kind of laugh through that is sometimes people just assume ill intent. And if we start using positive intent and realizing that sometimes people don't know or no one's ever told them, and it's good to give them some feedback, that can be really helpful. So expectations are always a must, okay? And then ensure that everyone understands the expectations and the goal for the session. So you want to make sure that you are using different forms of communication. So today I'm like a talker. I don't read my slides, right? So, but I put slides together because some people are more visual, right? And then also in this transcription, you'll be able to read what I'm saying. So there's all these different forms of ways I'm trying to navigate this unknown audience so that they can feel heard and seen and be able to grasp the content, right? So ensure open communication and that you are accessible to your group, that you're being inclusive, right? And open to everyone in your session, right? Is there any accommodations that need to be addressed, right? How many introverts versus extroverts do you have in your group? Is English their first language, right? Those are really important to think about before you run your session. So by identifying the group's purpose and goals, and then identifying who's who in your session, and then setting expectation, it sets you off for a great start. Now, after you do that, what's important? Plan, and plan. Pre-work, and more pre-work. Oh, I tell my students, because, as a a professor at Elmhurst University. It's really great because in the School of Business, like they let me kind of still run trainings, programs, consulting, right? Let's stay relevant because it's so important to stay relevant in this field. And so I do a lot of consulting, right? And I tell about when I run my programs, I have a detailed agenda. And then I say, I have a secret agenda. So my client gets one version of the agenda and I have mine. Mine is like, and then I say this, cue this. This is the time I start this. This is activity A, B, and C, right? It is like a pure facilitator curriculum for myself because there's a lot of things outside of my control. So a detailed agenda is critical for me. Now, for the client, I put enough information so they know what's going on and they feel comfortable with not giving them too much information. So they question or they have, because if they don't know what I'm trying to train on, I train on social skills, on leadership, teamwork. Sometimes the activities or the models, the theories I'm using, people might have opinions or they might not be quite sure about it. So they might have a lot of resistance. So I give them enough so they understand, but not too much so that they get lost in the details, right? So that's kind of a rule of thumb. Now, you also want to make sure that you gather the necessary materials for your program. So ensure that you have all program materials, that things are printed out in advance, that you have your slides, your handouts. If you're in person, get your markers, get your flip chart, make sure you have pens, name tags, right? Do you have a sign so people know where to go, right? So that's in person. Now, over Zoom or on virtual training, I do a ton of that. Have your virtual handout ready, your PDF ready to go, up and ready. Have your virtual flip charts written out, ready to go. You can use things like Mentimeter, Padlet. Oh, what else do I use? There's another one that I love. So you can use Kahoot if you're working with students too, but Padlet I love because it's real time and you can see everything it's saying. And then Mentimeter is great for polls, right? Also Teams, you have the ability to do Teams. Ooh, last but not least for like virtual sessions, make sure, are you doing breakout sessions that are pre-assigned or do you need to assign them? And then in your agenda, make sure that you're making time so that you can get them into groups. So have them do something like an activity on their own as you're putting them into groups. If not, that like lag time can be really harmful for your training. So I always like to have like, okay, so I'm going to put you in groups, but first I want you to look at my flip chart virtually and I want you to answer these questions on your own. So they're answering their questions on their own and I'm like in your groups and putting everyone in their groups, like making sure I can do it as fast as I can. I found that super helpful because if not, there's kind of like that delay and then people are just waiting and they get disengaged. So to keep the engagement high, that's a great rule of thumb. Okay, review and rehearse. Dry runs, and dry runs. Why? Because if you don't practice, you kind of like, you can make it, some people are great facilitators where, no one can tell, but there was just a little like breakdown in their flow or things were choppy, right? So with reviewing and rehearsing, it gives you the opportunity to practice, right? And the idea is that you're clear on the agenda, the materials, the activities, the discussion, everything flows and you're addressing potential challenges. So funny thing, right? So as prior to being a professor at Elmhurst and doing consulting, I did a lot of training and development in groups for organizations. And then I was mostly in the education schools where I did anti-bullying, anti-violence. So giving you some background because here it comes. So in schools, most of the time, my the visuals were very poor. The quality of the sound was poor. My deck didn't follow. There was no clicker. So you know what? I just got all those things, right? So I'd come up with my projector. I'd come up with ways that the handouts were delivered or that I had my own mic so that I didn't have to worry, but I could be accountable for things to happen. And I knew more things were within my control because of experience, but I had to go through so many of these trainings and assemblies to get like, okay, I need to get my own stuff because this isn't working. Or I just need to change the way I'm delivering stuff because it's not working. Because believe me, a small screen and a big gym and a mic that doesn't work and you have like maybe like 300 students listening to you, all I want to say is good luck. So always think about potential challenges. Super helpful. Okay, what's next? Okay, so now that we've kind of let's identified all our pre-work, now we are into, okay, let's establish our ground rules and expectations, right? So I kind of went through it before, but now I'm going to be really specific. there's certain things that need to be in your list of expectations, right? Or your ground rules. So you need to agree on the communication norms. So if you're on, especially virtual, right? Is it chat and then raise your hand? Do people just speak when like unmute themselves? Like, because if you have a larger group, you might have to have a certain order of things, right? You might have to have different channels of communication, but you need to let your group know what you're doing and how to do it. So where should they communicate? Now, face to face, like if you're doing a group. So I usually have Post-its, right? And then like index cards, so they can write notes there, or they can I put like index cards are for questions, Post-its are for thoughts, right? And then you can raise your hand or you can share back, right? And the reason is you want to make sure that you're establishing the guidelines for active listening, for everyone to have a chance to talk, and then a respectful dialogue. So agree on the communication norms. Number 2, define acceptable behaviors. Define unacceptable behaviors. So if you're like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. Here's what I'm talking about. Phones, and computers. So in session, in person, depending on the group I'm working with, I always tell people to put their phones away. I said, I will give you phone breaks. I will give you email breaks. I will let you go on your screen if you can just give me 30-minute segments of uninterrupted time so we can get into our flow. But I have to establish and define what is acceptable and unacceptable behaviors when it comes to phone usage in my sessions. Because when people don't know, or they don't think that it's not a big deal if they keep checking their phone, it's a big deal. It's super distracting. Number 2, you need to talk about how people are going to respect each other's difference. How do we create an inclusive environment? How do we establish psychological safety, right? So define acceptable and unacceptable behaviors. It doesn't have to be a long list, right? And depending on your group, if you work together a lot, it doesn't have to be like, you're not lecturing them on that, but you just want to make sure like, hey, it's not cool to have your phones out. I'm going to give you time and breaks for using your phones. Also, we need to use respectful language. We want to make sure that we give everybody a turn. So these are the ways we agree on the communication norms. Additionally, some unacceptable behaviors could be like yelling, screaming, or pointing at each other. I don't know, because if it's, I've done some conflict management training, and sometimes it gets heated and people just point at each other. So that could be like, no, you can even have a safe word if you want to, if you're doing like more escalated or de-escalation training or conflict, right? These are just some ideas I'm throwing out there. But make sure you define the acceptable behaviors. Now, encourage participation. So this is like my jam. I love talking about this because I'm really good at encouraging participation. Now, here's my secret sauce, how I do it. I make sure that I'm addressing everyone in the audience. So they might want to write things in the chat. They might want to write things down. They want to speak up, and they want to talk in small groups. So in my training, there are opportunities to do all of it. So they have small group discussions, they respond to questions online, and then they write things down. And then one person per group reports back, right? So by this, I'm encouraging participation. Now, here's another trick. So in the beginning of my sessions, I have icebreakers, and I make sure that people are spending the time 5 to 10 minutes in these icebreakers, that they get to know each other. They're learning each other's names, right? Names is super important to establish a foundation for psychological safety and trust. You need to know the people's names in the room. Who's who there, right? And then after they had spent like 5-10 minutes getting to know each other, right? So I just open the room so that we can feel more comfortable talking. I do it diligently, I repeatedly, and I do the same thing over and over so people get into the mode of like, it's important to participate. Now, if you're a professor or a facilitator and you have the same group over and over, do the same thing every single time you start your group. So here's what I do. I have them all stand up and go say hi to 3 different people. Go say hi to 5 different people. Go introduce yourself to 10 different people. So I'm having them move up from their seats and moving around for I give them that time so they get to talk to each other, and I say, okay, so this is what's going to happen every single time you start the session, every single time you start class. And that way they just know what to expect. And even though they might roll their eyes or sigh or oh, not again, by the end of the sessions, the training, or the semester, they have built multiple connections and they feel a lot more comfortable with each other. And you know what? I'll have the same students in my classes that maybe my colleague has. And in my class, they're chatty, asking questions, working with each other. And in the other classes, they're not, because they're not encouraging participation. So, And where that comes from is repetition, consistency, and establishing psychological safety. Okay, addressing conflict constructively. So as a facilitator, I'm great at this. As a person, I'm like, avoid. So I really have to get into my facilitator mindset when I address conflict constructively. I never address conflict deregulated in an aggressive tone, and I really try to emphasize that there's a time and space to address certain situations. So if it's in the moment, we can ask the group what they want, we can stop, we can pause, we can take a break. But I really, before I even jump in and assume things, I figure out what is going on and how do I address it. So you can do it by doing a start, stop, continue model. You can do it by let's pause. I feel like things are getting heated. Let's see what's going on. Let's take a pulse of what's going on. You can also give a break and talk to the people that maybe they're in the inner conflict in your group. But make sure that you have a way you're going to address conflict if it arises so it doesn't surprise you. Okay? So that's really how you would establish the ground rules and expectations, right? So let's recap. You agree on communication norms, you define acceptable behaviors, you encourage participation, and then you ask about hey, how are you going to address conflict if it happens in your group, right? Do you have a safe word, or do you use an apology model or a feedback model or a start, whatever you're going to use, just make sure that you talk about it in your ground rules and expectations. Okay, what's next? Creating a welcome environment. I love those words. I love it. Why? Because psychological safety is the key to success in facilitation. So there's a lot of things you can do. So you can arrange the seating to be more open. You can create, so the thing about creating a circle, make sure that everyone feels comfortable going into a circle. Also, you want to make sure that you promote visibility for what you're doing and that everyone is feeling included. So even in physical or virtual setups, foster collaborative atmosphere. So have small group discussion, have icebreakers so people can get to know each other. You need to know who's who in the room and how they will interact together. So that agenda is really helpful in the beginning. Going over the objectives, the goals of the training, kind of an overview can be super helpful to create a welcoming environment. Also, quick intro about yourself, right? So I realized that for you, you might be well, I didn't really talk about myself. I gave 15, 20 seconds of who am I. And if you're interested in learning more about me, you can always look it up. So I keep my facilitator intro to 20 to 30 seconds. Why? Because people are here to learn about the knowledge, skills, or ability and not to hear all about me. If they want to learn more about me, they can Google me, they can look me up, they can ask me after. So I give the high level, why am I doing this? Here's what I'm doing, and kind of just snippets of who I am. So it gives the audience an idea. Okay, she knows what she's talking about. I'm here to listen. I also create either virtual name tags or physical name tags so that people can use each other's names as much as they can. I add in pronouns so that I'm showing respect and inclusion. I also ask people what they want to get out of the session, right? So I create my my polls and stuff with visuals, pictures, different colors, different fonts, so that it's engaging, right? So I want to create that welcoming environment. So things that if you're not new to welcoming environment, these things you already do. But if you're new, what's really important is knowing people's names in the group. 2, knowing how they learn, understanding how you can best deliver the content so they receive it. Creating visibility for everyone, creating opportunities to connect, right? So to do that, you really want to make sure that you're coming from a space of curiosity, that you're asking questions, that you create a foundation of trust, right? That you are self-aware of your biases and your triggers, right? As a facilitator is super important. And that you know how to ask questions so people feel comfortable contributing to the conversation. So creating a welcome environment is super important. And it starts from the first interaction you have with your clients to the delivery of the training to post-training. So you really have to think about that process. And what does that look for you? Who are you as a facilitator? What is your model, right? So it's about having your hand, your heart, and head of facilitation skills. So what can you do physically? Is it a handout? Is it an activity to help people feel included, right? How can you have critical questions that really have them dive in and think about their perspective, right? adding a few stories is really important. And then like, the heart is about like, how can you get people to connect and feel aligned to what you're talking about so they feel like their voice matters in the content. So that's a little like snippet of creating a welcoming environment. Okay. So we talked about like introducing yourself in the group. So what I said is like short snippet about who you are. I always thought after 30 seconds, people aren't really truly listening to who I am. So I always put either a short bio in the beginning or at the end, and then they can look me up if they want to, if they found I was interesting. But that's just my style, my preference. If you want to have a bio, make sure that you're bullet pointing what you're sharing and that you're highlighting the most important things that are relevant to your audience. Make sure that people have a chance to share in small groups or larger groups about who they are. Titles are important in corporate training to understand who's who in the room. And then giving them time and space to get to know each other. So having a few questions, if you do it in a small group or large group, so that it's like, hey, this is who I am. This is how long I've been at the company. This is my title. This is what I do. This is what I want to learn, right? Those are like the technical questions. But a thing you can do is an introduction activity. So you have prompts set up because then you can get them in groups real fast, and like so virtually or in person. Like answer these 5 questions, right? And it's 5 intro questions about them, and then throw them in groups and have them introduce and practice their intro, practice their elevator pitch, right? Great way to like really work through like that chit chat and getting to know each other and creating connection. So that's just an idea. But it's really important to have names, also titles, and depending on who you are and like your values and as far as facilitation or the organization you come from, I strongly encourage pronouns too, so that I show absolutely the most respect and inclusion in my groups. But I just want to tell you that it's all about using names, right? And learning how to pronounce the names, using the names as much as you can, and making sure that everyone has an opportunity to get to know each other. Except if you're like a group of 300, that's really hard. And I've done some virtual training that way. So putting them in small groups and they get to know each other. So just some key pointers here. Okay. So encouraging participation is critical. So I think that asking open-ended questions is a definite like winner. So I like to have in my agenda like 20 open-ended questions to help. My debrief questions after each activity, right? There's open-ended questions. Yes, no answers don't really help you to build that participation. Now, I talked about, I want to reiterate it, so involving quiet members, so more the introverted. So small group participation, having them write on a virtual wall or respond to a poll or a Padlet, or then just writing things down at their tables and sharing it back. So like say you have Post-its, they can put the Post-its on a bigger Post-it note, right, in the back of the room. So that's a good thing. Now, next is in validating the contribution. So acknowledging participants' comments and ideas by paraphrasing is critical. So after everyone, like not everyone, but like say you do like large group share backs, right? Say group 1 shares something back. I would just, because sometimes my voice, I know how to portray it so can everyone hear. But maybe that group 1 didn't know, and so only half people heard. So I will recap and share back what they said, and I'll use it in a way like, did I get that right? So to make sure that they're engaged and they're like, yeah, you did, thank you, right? So that really helps with the engagement. So these are 3 ways to like encourage participation. Okay, now use active listening skills. I am a big fan of active listening. So I have a 3R technique that I train on for my advanced coaching facilitation and also for some of my facilitative training. And I won't go into detail about the 3R because it's a specific model. But I want to tell you about the top like 5 things to use active listening. Use your body, nod, right? Make eye contact, summarize or paraphrase is super important. Lean into the person, like make sure that your body is welcoming and not have your arms crossed, right? And that you want to avoid distractors. So take away your phone, make sure your laptop's not in front of you, right? Minimize the distraction so that you can really show that you're mindful, present, and there to listen to your participants, right? And engage in the group discussion and engage with the people. So use your body language to be open and welcoming, nod your head, make eye contact. You want to summarize and paraphrase what they're saying, right? Especially if something is really like long-winded. You want to be like, thanks for bringing it up, Bob. So it sounds like you're saying boom, 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 okay? Lean in towards this so that you're leaning into your group, like as a facilitator, move towards the group, right? Use your hands so that you seem open and receptive. Do not cross your arms, right? So that's really important. And avoid all distractors. So take away your phone, laptop, or anything that is taking you away from your group. Okay, so we're starting to wrap up. So what did we learn about today? So we learned about setting expectations, engaging the group, talking about active listening, because this is helpful when we manage conflict. Okay, so you set the expectations to manage conflict, but now you're in it. What do you do? First, identify the group dynamics. So as a facilitator, I'm trained in the DISC training, so I can usually figure out who's D, I, S, and C. And that's important for me. But use whatever you need to figure out who's who in the group and some of the personality traits or the things how they are addressing conversations, communications, how they're actively engaged or disengaged, and what are the dynamics going on, right? Is there conflict that was stirring before and you can see it play out? Are there cliques? Is it us versus them, right? Is someone and the outskirts of the group, like so in and out group behaviors, you're looking at all that. Identify biases, maybe assumptions people are making. So those are important. So address the conflict calmly. So do not escalate, do not deregulate, right? Take your emotions and push them to the side so that you can be calm and collected when addressing the conflict. Summarize the different viewpoints without putting in your own opinion, right? Make sure that it's observable, it's non-biased, and that you're summarizing the viewpoints of the conflict. Then find common ground, right? Find ways so people can hear each other and they can really listen. So it's not necessarily by, going back and forth, but finding common ground. So going beyond the I agree to disagree respectfully, it's more like, hey, let's hear what you have to say, and let's hear what you have to say. And what do we have in common in this conversation? How can we come together? What are some things we can address? Like, let's think about their perspective and their perspective and your perspective. And how can is there things that are aligned? Is there things, where's the disconnect? So exploratory is really important when you want to address conflict. But finding the common ground can be really helpful and effective to address conflict fast. Okay, so the key elements to facilitation. You want to build rapport and psychological safety. Check. You want to be clear on your objective. Check. You want to add in activities and engaging content. Check, check. So that means for me, per hour, I usually have one activity and one icebreaker, one activity, a case study, one activity, group discussion, right? And then you want to make sure you debrief each of those things so that people can process and apply the learning. If not, it's just an activity, it's just a game. So debrief is critical, right? And then closing commitments. So I love this, and this is my thing, so I want to share it with you because I find it super effective. Okay, what do? Have closing commitment statements so that your audience is committing to one thing they're going to change, one thing they're going to do, right? So that can really help you to solidify the content and have next steps and action plan, right? So these are the key elements for facilitation. Now, let's go over the do's and don'ts. Have a strong intro and setup, clear agenda and layout for the training, right? So I like to have my slides having here's what we're going to view today. This is what we're going to accomplish, right? Read the room, right? Make sure you know who's coming prior. If your group is small enough, I even have them send over either their bios, or I look them up on LinkedIn, or I create a seating chart, or I do whatever I can do to learn the people's names as fast as I can and things about them. So that's in the pre-work. And then when you're in the session, read the room, because there's often cliques or people that get along better, and it's good to know who's who in that room. Have relevant stories and guided visuals. Storytelling is so powerful. Practice and get good at it, because stories can really drive the learning, right? And guided visuals can help people oh, yeah, that makes sense. Oh, okay, right? Activities that engage the audience. So making sure that your activities are relevant, that they will work with this group, and then they make sure that they can engage the audience. So why do I emphasize that? I facilitate programs all the time still. So sometimes I'm I try a new activity and I'm ooh, that wasn't the best. It's a great learning opportunity. So then what I do for my own time is I debrief and I make sure that I fix the activity for the next session, and that I also have backup in case things aren't going well, or I have pivots or spins so that it can help me, right? Then when you're done with the activity, debrief time, and processing is critical. You need to have debrief questions. You need to have them do in small groups and share back in large groups so that you're capturing that learning and that application. And then clear time and group management practices. Make sure you're letting your audience know the time of the activity, how long it will take, the desired outcomes, and the time it ends. Timing is everything. So the one thing I'm really strong at is if I start even late, I will still finish on time. There's only rarely an exception that I run over, and I always ask for permission because you know what? We all hate that. When a meeting runs over, a training runs over, you're just looking, you're not even listening. And I, as a facilitator, I'm the worst. I'm like, hey, I got to go, and I just don't put up with it. So I'm telling you this to make sure that you're monitoring your time. So end on time, right? Even if you have to cut things out, cut it, make sure that you end on time. Don'ts of facilitation. Do not read your slides. Reading your slides is the worst, okay? Don't talk too much about yourself, right? Gauge that your stories are engaging and relevant. Don't jump around with your agenda. The back and forth, left and right, so if people that are very logical and structured, that can really drive them crazy. Don't be unclear about the strategies or over-explain yourself. So if you're going too deep into something in the nitty-gritty details and you're losing time, stop, right? Just bullet point stuff. Don't be overly focused on data, right? Give a story, bring the data to life by explaining examples, visuals, right? But don't kill your group with data and facts because people don't remember that. They're going to remember how they felt in your training. A good story where you bring out some emotion, they're going to remember that story because it's how they made them feel, right? And do not make assumptions. That's the worst. Remove all biases and assumptions when you're facilitating. Okay. So I feel like we did some really good stuff today. Now let's talk about, as we close off, the tips and strategies to start facilitating a great session. So I want you to either pause this recording or do this after, but you're going to start thinking about, what can I do to be a better facilitator? So you can download the blank template that I have for this training, right? And you can fill it out, or you can do this on your own. Just grab 3 index cards. So you're going to make a list of what are you going to start doing from this training, right? The things I've explained. What are some things that you're going to start doing? Now, after that, you're going to start listing the things that you're going to stop doing. So what are some things that you're currently doing that aren't effective? What are you going to stop? And then you're going to celebrate yourself because you're going to write the stuff that you want to continue doing, right? So using the start, stop, continue, you're going to figure out, hey, what do I want to start, stop, and continue doing to be a great facilitator? I would challenge you to write 2 to 5 bullet points, right, for each section so that you have a good grasp of, hey, this is what I learned and this is how I'm going to apply it. And that, is my friends, is called practical application. Super helpful in facilitation because people leave with something. They have a thing that the how-to is critical, okay? So that's my homework for you. Now, if you found this helpful and you're like, wow, I really learned a lot, or you reminded me a lot of stuff I forgot, thank you. And come join me. So find me on LinkedIn. You can shoot me an email. There's my website. So I'm a keynote speaker. I'm a coach. I'm a consultant. I use strength-based training to deliver effective trainings, messages. Like I did a TED Talk. And then also I've presented across the world on these social skills and emotional intelligence. And that put me just about 30 seconds, right? So that's what I want to say. So make sure you have an intro that is fun, engaging. You write more, but you also do just about 30 seconds so people can stay engaged. So come find me, right? Send me feedback, questions. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you enjoyed this training, and you can join me for our next sessions. And then remember to connect with me so that I can hear your voice. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a great day.